Hello everyone, this is Lily, and today I'm going to share with you a story that still haunts me to this day. This is not just any paranormal story. It's something that happened to someone close to me, someone who, until this very day, refuses to talk about it ever again. But I will tell you everything just as it was told to me. It all began in 2013, the year my friend, let's call her Sarah, moved in with her long-term boyfriend, Mark. They had been together for years, and finally, they decided to take that next step, living under one roof. The reason they picked this particular apartment was simple. It was close to their workplaces, making their daily commute easier. The place was a 3-story apartment building with a total of 9 units. Each floor had 3 units, and the one they rented was on the 2nd floor. The best part? Their unit had great ventilation. Just open the door and a nice breeze would flow in. Plus, the utilities worked fine, and the landlord was easy to talk to. Everything seemed perfect at first. But as we all know, things that seem too good to be true usually are. The first few nights were uneventful. They spent their time unpacking, arranging furniture, and getting used to their new home. However, by the end of the first week, Sarah started to feel uneasy. It was nothing too obvious at first, just a strange sensation, as if she was being watched, especially in the kitchen. At first, she brushed it off, thinking it was just nerves from the big move. But soon, small, inexplicable things started happening. The lights in the kitchen would flicker, even though the electrical system was supposedly fine. Faucets would turn on by themselves in the middle of the night. Doors would creak open, even when she was sure she had closed them tightly. Sarah and Mark had different work schedules, meaning they spent a lot of time alone in the apartment. One morning, while Mark was at work, Sarah decided to clean the apartment. As she was washing her face in the bathroom sink, she suddenly heard a faint whisper in her right ear. It was unintelligible, like someone murmuring in a low voice. She froze, her hands still dripping wet. The whisper had been so close, almost as if someone was standing right next to her. Slowly, she turned her head to look, but there was no one there. Her heart pounded in her chest. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe she was still groggy from waking up. Shaking her head, she tried to brush it off, convincing herself that it was nothing. But it didn't stop there. Later that afternoon, as she swept the floor, she caught a whiff of something strange, an unpleasant, rotten odor, as if something had been left to decay for weeks. She checked the garbage, the sink, even under the furniture, but everything was clean. No matter where she went, the smell seemed to follow her, lingering in the air before disappearing as suddenly as it came. That night, when Mark returned home, Sarah told him about what she had experienced. He laughed at first, teasing her about watching too many horror movies, but she could tell that he was trying to reassure himself as much as her. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. The real nightmare began a few weeks later. It was past midnight when Mark woke up to the feeling of someone tugging at his blanket. He groggily reached out, thinking it was Sarah. But when his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw that she was fast asleep beside him. Confused, he turned his attention to the foot of the bed. And that's when he saw it. A dark, crouching figure. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It didn't move, it just stared, throat. He wanted to scream, but fear paralyzed him. He blinked, and in that fraction of a second, the figure was gone. The room was empty again. The next morning, he told Sarah about it, expecting her to laugh it off. Instead, her face turned pale. "I saw it too," she whispered. From that night on, the haunting escalated. Objects moved on their own. The air inside the apartment always felt cold, no matter how warm the weather was. Neighbors started asking if they were okay, mentioning that they often heard strange noises coming from their unit late at night. Whispers, footsteps, sometimes even crying. Sarah and Mark knew they had to leave, but their lease wasn't up yet, and breaking it would mean losing a lot of money. So they tried to endure it. But the entity, or whatever it was relentless. One night Sarah woke up gasping for air, feeling like something was pressing down on her chest. Mark turned on the lights, only to find deep scratches running down her arms. That was the final straw. They packed their things and left the next day. Years later, Sarah told me she still has nightmares about that place. To this day, she refuses to talk about what she saw that night, the last night they spent there. Mark, too, avoids the topic. The apartment building still stands, and other tenants have come and gone. But if you ask around, you'll hear the same eerie stories. Maybe it was something tied to the land. Maybe it was a restless spirit. Or maybe, just maybe, there are things that exist beyond our understanding. One thing's for sure, Sarah and Mark were lucky to get out. And sometimes the best decision you can make is to leave. But this isn't where the story ends. A few months after moving out, Sarah received a message from a stranger on social media. It was a woman who had just moved into the same apartment. She had found Sarah's name on an old mail package left behind. Her message was simple. "Hi, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I think something is wrong with this place. Have you ever experienced anything strange here?" Sarah's blood ran cold. She never replied. The nightmares continued, and somewhere in that apartment something was still waiting, just past midnight. This time, however, it wasn't just the headache that disturbed him. It was something else. At first he couldn't tell what had woken him up. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. He turned to check on Sarah, but she was sound asleep beside him. The apartment felt eerily still, yet something felt off. Then he heard it, a soft rustling noise, like fabric brushing against the floor. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was definitely there. His eyes darted toward the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. The hallway beyond was shrouded in darkness, but for a split second, he thought he saw movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the doorway. His breath hitched. He wanted to believe it was just his imagination, but then came the whisper, low, guttural, right by his ear. He bolted upright in bed, his heart pounding against his ribs. He fumbled for the bedside lamp and switched it on, bathing the room in warm light. But there was nothing there. No shadow, no whisper, just silence. His head still throbbed, but now an unsettling chill crept up his spine. Slowly he swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood up. The air felt heavy, as if the room itself was pressing down on him. Cautiously, he stepped toward the bedroom door and peered into the hallway. Nothing. But as he turned to go back to bed, his eyes landed on something that made his blood run cold. The closet door, one they never used, one that always remained shut, was wide open. Inside, the darkness felt deeper than it should have been. It wasn't just shadows. It was like a void, an abyss that seemed to swallow all light. Mark swallowed hard. Hadn't Sarah closed it earlier? Something inside him screamed at him not to look, not to step closer. But he couldn't help it. Slowly, he reached for the door handle, intending to shut it. Just as his fingers brushed the wood, a sudden gust of freezing air shot out from the closet, slamming into him like a wall. The light flickered violently, and for the briefest moment he saw it. A face, pale, hollow, eyes like deep, empty pits. Then just as quickly as it came, it was gone. The air stilled. The light returned to normal. Mark staggered back, his breath ragged. His hands trembled as he slammed the closet door shut, locking it. He didn't dare open it again. That night, he didn't sleep. And when Sarah woke up the next morning, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale, his hands still shaking. Something was very, very wrong with their apartment, and whatever it wasn't going to let them go so easily. The next afternoon, after having lunch, I decided to go ahead with my plan to give the chocolates to the kid I had seen playing near the last unit on our floor. Holding the chocolates in my hand, I walked down the hallway, feeling slightly relieved to have something normal to focus on after the strange experiences in our apartment. When I reached the door of the last unit, I knocked lightly. No answer. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. Just as I was about to turn away, the door creaked open slightly. I peered inside, expecting to see the child or maybe a parent, but instead, there was only darkness. The apartment was oddly silent. A strange, musty smell wafted out from within, like something old and untouched for years. I hesitated. "Hello?" I called out softly. No response. My heart began to pound as an unsettling realization crept over me. The hallway was eerily quiet, too quiet. It was as if the usual background noises of the building had been swallowed up by something unseen. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint and distorted like a voice carried through water. It came from inside the apartment. I took a step back. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet felt frozen in place. The whispering continued, growing just a fraction louder, though I still couldn't understand the words. Then, in the dim light filtering through the hallway, I saw movement, a shadow. It shifted ever so slightly in the darkness beyond the doorway. It was small, child-sized. The realization sent a wave of cold dread through me. My mouth went dry. That was when I noticed something else. The chocolates in my hand, wrapped in crinkling foil, had begun to feel unnaturally warm, almost as if they were melting at an alarming rate. A sudden gust of cold air rushed past me, and in that instant the door slammed shut with a force so strong it rattled the walls. I gasped and stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't think, I just ran. I gasped and stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't think, I just ran. By the time I reached my apartment, apartment, I was breathless, my hands trembling so badly that I dropped the chocolates onto the floor. I didn't pick them up. I just shut the door and locked it, pressing my back against the wood, trying to steady my breathing. That was no normal child. And that apartment. Something was terribly wrong with it. The next morning, after dropping Mark off for work, Sarah made her way back up to the apartment, carrying the chocolates she had set aside for the child she had seen the previous day. As she reached the farthest unit where she had spotted the little boy playing, she noticed that the door was slightly open. Not wanting to intrude, she called out politely, "Hello? Excuse me?" A young woman emerged from inside, smiling kindly at Sarah. Through the doorway, she could see another woman seated at a table studying. Sarah returned the smile and said, "Hi, I saw a little boy playing outside your unit yesterday, and I thought I'd bring him some chocolates." At her words, the two young women exchanged a glance. Their expressions shifted subtly, from friendly curiosity to something unreadable. The one standing at the door hesitated before asking, "What? Little boy?" Confused, Sarah described him. The height, the dark hair, the clothes he had been wearing. The moment she finished, the woman at the table put down her pen and turned to look directly at Sarah. Her voice was careful, deliberate. "We're the only ones who live here," she said. "Just the two of us. We're both students. There's no child here." A strange, cold sensation crept down Sarah's spine. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe the boy had come from another unit. Could he be from the apartment next door? She asked. The first woman shook her head. No. The man who lives there lives alone. No kids. Sarah felt rooted to the spot. She knew what she had seen. The boy had been right there. She had watched him play. An uneasy silence filled the space between them. To break it, Sarah simply handed the chocolates to the two women. "Well, I guess I must have been mistaken. You can have these anyway." The two women accepted them with a polite thank you. But just as Sarah was about to leave, one of them spoke again. "You're not the first person to see things in this building." Sarah turned back, her heart beating a little faster. The woman who had been studying now looked at her intently. "Strange things happen here. We don't like to talk about it, but we've seen things too." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The worst was when I was alone one night. My roommate had gone back home for a few days, so I was studying here by myself. Around midnight, I started hearing noises coming from the bathroom. At first, I ignored it. There was no reason for anyone to be in there." Sarah could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers curled slightly against the table's surface. "But then the noises didn't stop," she went on. "It was like rustling, shifting, like someone moving inside." Sarah held her breath as the woman continued. "I finally got up and opened the door. And then," she paused, as if reliving the horror of that night. "I saw her." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. There was a woman hanging upside down from the ceiling. Sarah's breath caught. Her feet were attached to the ceiling, but her body dangled unnaturally. Her head was level with mine. Her long hair was soaked in blood, dripping down her pale face. And her eyes... The woman swallowed hard. One of them was missing. Sarah's skin prickled with cold. the worst part, the woman took a shaky breath. She was smiling. Sarah felt a deep, instinctive sense of dread settle in her stomach. The woman finished in a whisper. I ran out of that apartment so fast I barely remembered to breathe. The other woman nodded. We don't talk about it because we're still here. We don't want to invite whatever it is back. Sarah felt herself backing away instinctively, her body tense. I should get going, she said, her voice barely steady. The two women only nodded. As Sarah stepped away from their doorway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Since Sarah and I wanted to stay close together, we opted for the two vacant rooms upstairs. The landlady, a middle-aged woman with a stern but kind face, warned us that most tenants preferred the lower floor because fewer people stayed upstairs. She didn't elaborate, and at the time, we didn't think much of it. The apartment itself was simple: white walls, wooden floors, and a long hallway connecting the rooms. There was a communal bathroom at the far end of the hallway, and next to it, a small, dimly lit stairwell that led to the rooftop. The air inside felt oddly still, as if the place had been abandoned for a long time. Yet there were signs of previous tenants, a few stray slippers outside closed doors, faint scribbles on the walls. Our first few nights there were uneventful. Sarah and I settled in, decorated our rooms, and focused on our studies. Occasionally, we would hear the other tenants moving around downstairs, but aside from the occasional greeting, we kept to ourselves. Then strange things began happening. One evening, Sarah came to my room looking uneasy. I keep hearing footsteps outside my door at night, she whispered, like someone pacing back and forth. I frowned. Maybe it's one of the other tenants? She shook her head. I thought so too, but when I checked, there was no one there. And the moment I opened the door, the footsteps stopped. A chill ran down my spine, but I didn't want to overthink it. We brushed it off, convincing ourselves that maybe she was just tired and imagining things. A few nights later, I had my own experience. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling an unbearable weight pressing down on my chest. My entire body was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Panic surged through me, but then I noticed something worse. From the corner of my vision, I could see a shadow standing by my closet. A dark figure, unmoving, its head slightly tilted as if watching me. I wanted to scream, to close my eyes, but I couldn't. Then the figure moved. It didn't walk. It glided, shifting closer, inch by inch, until it was right beside my bed. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. I struggled to breathe, my vision growing blurry. And then it whispered my name. The paralysis broke. I gasped, sitting up abruptly. My room was empty. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen. I barely slept after that. The next morning, Sarah noticed the dark circles under my eyes. You saw something, didn't you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. She swallowed. Then we need to talk to the others. That evening, we gathered the few tenants who were willing to talk. One of the older students, a guy named Joel, sighed when we told him what we had experienced. You're not the first ones, he said. This place, it's not normal. We leaned in as he continued. People hear voices at night, footsteps in empty hallways, doors open and close by themselves, and sometimes he hesitated. Sometimes people see her. Her? I asked, my skin prickling. Joel looked grim. The woman with the missing eye. A heavy silence settled over us. Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances. We had only just begun to uncover the horrors of that place. The room we chose, Sarah and I, was located on the second floor, the second room after you climbed the stairs. It was just the right size for the two of us. In fact, it could probably fit 2 more people, but that was up to us if we decided to invite others. The owner mentioned that there were 2 double-deck beds in the room, which were aligned across from each other. The kitchen was just the right size too, and I could say it was a decent place for us to study. Our study tables and chairs fit well enough. We were still newbies, still getting used to everything, so we were incredibly excited to move in. We thought it would be much more fun than staying in our old house, because of course, there would be no interruptions. Little did we know, we would actually have housemates in the room with us. They weren't exactly what we expected, though. During the first week after we moved in, all we did was clean, buy groceries, and shuttle back and forth between the university for enrollment and submitting requirements. We hardly spent any time in the apartment at all because we were so busy. It took us a few more weeks to finally settle in, and only then did we think we'd have the time to relax before classes began. However, the very nights we planned to rest were when something would disturb us. It was a regular night, somewhere between 8:00 and 9 p.m. I was in the room at the time, just casually playing on my phone. Sarah was in the bathroom washing a few of her clothes. While I was focused on my game, I suddenly froze when I heard a scream coming from the bathroom. It wasn't Sarah's voice. It wasn't even a sound that came from someone normal. The scream was sharp, frantic, and it seemed to echo through the walls. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't move for a few seconds, paralyzed by the sudden fear. I tried to call out to Sarah, but my voice was caught in my throat. I quickly stood up and rushed toward the bathroom, knocking frantically on the door. "Sarah, are you okay?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The door creaked open, and Sarah stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She looked at me with disbelief, as if she had seen something she couldn't explain. I don't know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I heard it too. It sounded like someone was in here with me." My mind raced. What was going on? There was no one else in the apartment that we knew of. We hadn't invited anyone over, and the other housemates, though strange, had kept to themselves so far. I glanced around the room, trying to make sense of the eerie atmosphere. "Maybe it was just the pipes," I suggested, trying to calm her down, though I didn't believe it myself. Sarah shook her head, still visibly shaken. "No, it wasn't the pipes. It was something else. Something in here." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a random noise. It wasn't an accident. The feeling in the room had shifted. Something was wrong. But what could it be? As we stood there, unsure of what to do next, the silence that followed felt even more oppressive. It was as if the very air around us had thickened, and the weight of it pressed down on my chest. We both exchanged uncertain glances before I decided we needed to do something about it. "Let's check the place," I said. "We can't just ignore this." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. Together, we tiptoed around the apartment, checking every corner, every closet, and every room. We found nothing. The apartment, though dimly lit and seemingly empty, felt strangely suffocating. I walked into the living room and was about to suggest we take a break when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadow darting across the far end of the room. I froze again. "Did you see that?" I whispered urgently. Sarah nodded, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. "What was that?" Before I could answer, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The air turned cold, the kind of cold that you could feel deep in your bones. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of footsteps echoed through the apartment. We both turned toward the source of the noise, our hearts pounding in our chests. There was no one there, nothing. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. I knew we had to get out of there. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Let's go now," I whispered urgently, pulling Sarah by the arm. We didn't know what was happening, but we both understood that we weren't safe. Sarah's scream startled me. At first I thought she had hurt herself, which made me quickly jump to my feet. I rushed to the bathroom, expecting to find her sprawled on the floor, having slipped. But when I reached the door, I found her standing outside the bathroom, staring inside with wide, terrified eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. She turned to me, trembling. "Someone threw a hanger at me," she said, almost too softly to hear. It wasn't just a coincidence, like it falling off the hook and hitting my head. No, it was thrown. It came from a distance. I stared at her in disbelief, trying to wrap my mind around what she was saying. "Thrown? But that's impossible. The hanger is on the hook. It couldn't have just fallen." Sarah nodded. "I know. And it wasn't just that. When it hit me, I heard this little giggling sound, like someone was laughing. It wasn't normal. It wasn't just the wind." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The idea of someone else in the apartment with us made my stomach churn. "Did you see anyone? Was there anyone there?" "No," Sarah said, her voice now trembling with fear. "I couldn't see anything, but I could hear that giggle. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just some prank or coincidence. Whatever it was something far more sinister. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I took the initiative. "I'll go in the bathroom and check." I walked into the bathroom cautiously, looking around as if expecting something to jump out at me. It was eerily quiet, except for the faint sound of running water. I spotted the hanger on the floor, just as Sarah had said. It had clearly fallen in a way that made no sense at all. There was no way it could have just fallen from the hook. It looked like it had been tossed with force. I quickly grabbed Sarah's laundry basket, which she had left in the bathroom, and went back to her, trying to act calm, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Let's just finish this up and go to the room," I said, trying to push the unsettling feeling aside. "We'll deal with it tomorrow." Sarah nodded, though she was still visibly shaken. We went back to the room, pretending like nothing had happened, like we were just two friends, relaxing after a long day. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. The next day, things took another strange turn. I was outside doing some errands while Sarah was in the kitchen cooking. She had been preparing dinner, her back turned as she stirred something in the frying pan. But then, the faucet suddenly turned on by itself. Sarah froze in place, staring at the sink. "What the hell?" she muttered, walking over to turn it off. But as soon as she went back to cooking, the faucet turned on again. This time, she was visibly irritated. "What the hell is going on?" she whispered to herself. "Fed up!" Sarah shouted at the empty kitchen, her voice echoing. "Stop messing with me! I'm not afraid of you!" For a moment, everything went quiet. The air in the room felt thick, like something was watching, waiting. Sarah, still tense, shook her head as if trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that was creeping up on her. She returned to what she was doing, but the unease lingered. It felt like the apartment was no longer just a place we lived. It felt like something else, something that wasn't supposed to be there, was slowly taking control. The next day, Sarah's voice was louder than usual. When she yelled, it seemed to carry through the walls, and she believed that her shout could even be heard in the room next door. After she shouted, she walked back to the faucet and turned it off with force, making sure it didn't turn back on again. Thankfully, it stayed silent. However, the strange occurrences didn't stop there. That afternoon, while we were having a late snack, I noticed something off. Sarah was lying under her blanket, completely wrapped up, but she wasn't eating. I called out to her, asking why she wasn't eating, but she didn't answer. Her body was trembling, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I approached her cautiously, noticing that her face was flushed. Concerned, I gently placed my hand on her neck, and I could feel how hot she was. Her temperature was unusually high. I quickly rushed to grab some medicine, hoping it would ease her condition, but it didn't seem to help. Her fever didn't break, and that night, it only seemed to worsen. The next day, Sarah's condition hadn't improved. She was still feverish, coughing, and congested, despite taking the medicine. It was as if whatever was affecting her was only getting stronger. She wasn't able to rest either. When she tried to nap, she began mumbling in her sleep, speaking in strange, incomprehensible words. Sometimes she groaned in her sleep, her voice strained and terrified. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I called her aunt, hoping for some advice or help, and she came over as quickly as she could. After arriving at the apartment and checking on Sarah, I told her aunt about the strange incident with the hanger. I also mentioned that Sarah had been acting strangely, especially after the unsettling events at the apartment. Her aunt paused and looked at me with concern. "Perhaps she's been chosen," she said in a hushed voice. "Maybe something in the apartment has decided to play with her." I felt a shiver crawl down my spine as she spoke. It didn't make sense, but at that moment it felt like the only explanation that would fit. Her aunt quickly made arrangements to bring someone over, a healer who was familiar with their family and had experience with these kinds of situations. The healer arrived soon after carrying a candle. She immediately lit the candle, its flame flickering in the dimly lit room. As she whispered prayers under her breath, I couldn't help but watch in awe. I had never seen anything like this before. Despite the calmness of the room, the air seemed to grow heavier, and there was an unsettling smell that lingered around the apartment. It wasn't something I could identify, but it made my stomach turn. Minutes later, burning incense and chanting prayers, the healer shook her head and muttered under her breath. "This is strong," she said, her eyes narrowing. "The element is powerful. It has noticed her." I didn't fully understand what she meant, but the look on her face made me fear that whatever was happening, it was much worse than I had imagined. After the healer had finished the rituals, Cindy's aunt insisted that she remain at the apartment for a while longer. She wasn't willing to leave until she was certain that Cindy's condition had improved. I could tell that Cindy's aunt was deeply worried and had a strong sense of responsibility toward her niece. It was clear she had her doubts about whether the healer's methods would work, but she wasn't about to give up just yet. It was evident that Cindy's aunt had been through something similar before. She managed to push the healer into staying longer, offering what little comfort she could in her own way. The healer, still determined, performed additional rituals, praying over every corner of the apartment. She insisted that they needed to focus on making sure nothing in the apartment would harm us any longer. Cindy's aunt also joined in the prayers, hoping to purify the place and drive away whatever dark force had been lingering. For a while, things seemed to settle. Cindy's condition improved, though not without the weight of fear still hanging in the air. The air in the apartment felt lighter, but the unease we had felt was far from gone. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting. Over the next few days, Cindy regained some energy. She was still not completely back to normal, but there were no more strange occurrences, or at least none that we noticed. Cindy's aunt returned to her own home, but she left behind some instructions for us to continue with our own protection. "Make sure you keep the house in order," she told us, "and don't let your guard down." We followed her advice, though deep down, I knew it wasn't over. We had merely scratched the surface. A few months passed, and life seemed to return to a semblance of normalcy. But just as we had started to feel comfortable again, I found myself becoming the next victim of whatever malevolent force lingered in the apartment. It was around 4 months after Cindy's ordeal when it happened to me. Cindy was away at the university attending her classes. I had the place to myself, trying to rest and catch up on some sleep. I had just settled into bed, the room dim and quiet, when I suddenly woke up to a sound I didn't recognize at first. It was a voice, soft, reverent, and it sounded like someone was praying. The words were familiar to me. They were prayers I had heard many times, the ones Catholics often recite. I was still groggy from sleep, but my mind was alert enough to realize that this voice was close. Really close. I kept my eyes shut, pretending to still be asleep as I strained to listen. The voice, a woman's voice, was clear, as if the person was standing just a few meters away from me. The sound was unmistakable. I could even make out the words, "Our Father," in the prayer. But something felt off. The voice had an eerie quality to it, unnatural, like it was mocking the sacred words. Between each line of the prayer, I could hear a strange, low laugh. It was like the voice was trying to turn something holy into a joke. A mocking, taunting laughter that sent a shiver down my spine. My heart began to race as I recognized the chilling tone of the voice. I was frozen in place, unable to move. I couldn't open my eyes or scream. The laughter kept coming room with an unsettling atmosphere. It was as if the very air around me had become thick with fear. I tried to convince myself that it was just a figment of my imagination, that I was still half asleep, but I knew deep down that it wasn't. The sound was too real. The voice was too clear. I slowly opened my eyes, glancing around the room, my senses heightened. But the room was empty. The prayer had stopped, but the lingering feeling of dread remained, hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me, waiting for me to react. I closed my eyes again, trying to force myself to calm down. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel the presence. I tried to call out to Cindy, but I didn't have the courage to speak. The fear of what was in the room with me was suffocating. My thoughts were racing, my heart pounding in my chest. It was as if I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. It felt like hours before the oppressive silence finally lifted, though I couldn't tell if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. When I finally mustered enough strength to get up, I rushed out of the room, my legs unsteady beneath me. I had to get out of there. The apartment no longer felt like a safe place. It was a place that had been marked, a place where something dark had made its presence known. I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. It was as if the air around me had thickened, becoming heavier with each passing second. My mind raced, replaying the events that had just occurred. Cindy's warning echoed in my mind, and the sound of the strange prayer, the laughter in between the lines. It felt like a curse lingering just beneath the surface of our daily lives. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to me like shadows. That night, I couldn't find rest. The fear from earlier still gripped me tightly. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The quiet of the apartment felt unnatural, as though it was too still, too expectant. The silence seemed to be watching, waiting for something to happen, but I couldn't tell what. I finally decided to sit up, turning my gaze to the room. My heart skipped a beat when I realized that once again, I could hear the faint sound of someone praying. I hadn't imagined it this time. I was certain of it. I looked around the room, but there was no one. No one was there. Yet the voice was clear, reverberating off the walls. It felt as though the room itself had come alive, vibrating with the eerie sound. With every passing moment, the voice seemed to grow more disturbing, more insistent. I wanted to shout, to scream, to stop it, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat was dry, my heart racing with fear. I wanted to move, to get out of that room, but I was paralyzed, unable to do anything but listen to the haunting voice that mocked the prayer. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen in fear, but the voice eventually faded away, leaving an unsettling silence behind. Still, the air felt thick, heavy. I didn't feel safe. My thoughts were scattered, and I could hardly believe what had just happened. After some time, I managed to muster the courage to open my eyes, glancing nervously around the room. I saw nothing, heard nothing, but I could still feel it. A presence, something watching me. Slowly, I got up from the bed, my limbs shaky from the lingering fear. My mind tried to convince me that it was all just a nightmare, a trick of my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong. I left the bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked cautiously to the kitchen. I needed to calm myself, to shake off the dread that had taken over me. But just as I reached for a glass of water, I heard Cindy calling me from the living room. Her voice sounded distant, as if she was calling from a faraway place. When I walked into the living room, I saw her sitting at the desk, a concerned look on her face. She asked, "What were you saying earlier?" I stared at her in confusion, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. She explained, "I heard you talking, but it didn't sound like you. You were saying things, but I couldn't make sense of it. I thought you were talking to someone." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had been in my room, silent, trying to recover from the strange experience I had just gone through. "I wasn't talking," I replied a bit too quickly. "Maybe it was something from the next room. You know, maybe it was the neighbors or something." Sarah seemed uncertain, but nodded, not fully convinced. We shrugged it off and returned to what we were doing, though the uneasy feeling never left either of us. It hung between us like a cloud that we couldn't escape. Days passed, and the unease lingered. The apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a house of whispers, each corner holding secrets we weren't meant to uncover. Then a few weeks later, something worse happened. It started with a simple nap. The afternoon sun poured through the window as I lay down to rest, hoping to catch up on sleep after a long day at university. I hadn't even been asleep for long when I suddenly felt an intense pressure on my chest. It was as if something was holding me down, pushing all the air out of my lungs. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It was as if my body had betrayed me, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I was awake, but my body wouldn't respond. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My heart raced and sweat dripped down my face as I fought to break free from whatever invisible force held me in place. It felt like an eternity before the sensation lifted and I could finally move again. Gasping for air, I sat up, my mind still reeling from the experience. I stumbled out of bed, feeling lightheaded and dizzy, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I hurried to the kitchen, desperate for water, trying to calm my racing heart. I didn't understand what had just happened. When I went back into the living room, still shaken, I found Cindy sitting on the couch. Her eyes were wide with concern as she asked, "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at her, my throat dry and my hands trembling. "I don't know. I don't feel right." She frowned, sensing something wasn't quite right. But before I could explain, I noticed something strange. The air around us had changed. It felt colder, like a heavy fog had descended upon the apartment. The weight of it pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. That's when I saw her. The figure, a woman dressed in white, her face hidden behind the veil of her long hair. She was standing at the edge of the room, just beyond the doorway. Her eyes were missing. It was as if she had no eyes, just empty sockets that stared into me, through me. I froze, unable to move, unable to speak. Sarah had just returned when I heard her taking off her shoes. I greeted her as she entered, wiping her damp hair with a towel, but her response caught me off guard. She looked at me with concern and said, "What happened to your neck?" Her voice was tinged with worry, and I immediately glanced at my reflection in the mirror. My heart skipped a beat, and I saw the red marks on my neck, fresh scratches that seemed to pulse with an eerie warmth. I was stunned. I hadn't even noticed them until then, and the realization sent a chill down my spine. I was too frightened to say anything about what I had been through, especially not the nightmare I had experienced earlier. I didn't want to burden Cindy with the same dread I was feeling. I couldn't tell her about the figure that had appeared at the edge of the room, or the suffocating feeling I had just escaped. I feared that if I did, she'd never sleep soundly again. I don't know," I stammered, trying to downplay the situation. Maybe I scratched it by accident. Sarah didn't seem fully convinced, but she let it slide. She tried to brush it off, but the unease between us remained. The more we thought about it, the more the reality of what had been happening began to settle in. We couldn't ignore it any longer. The strange occurrences in the apartment were escalating. The woman in white, the one with no eyes, was haunting us, her presence more persistent and terrifying by the day. Every night, as we tried to rest, we could feel her presence looming, watching us from the corner of our rooms, or sometimes just outside the door. There were moments when we could hear faint whispers or soft footsteps, but when we checked, the apartment was always empty. Our hearts raced with every sound, our minds unable to shake the growing sense of fear. It wasn't just a ghost. It was as though something dark and malevolent was watching, waiting to make its move. There was one night, after a particularly frightening encounter, when we couldn't take it anymore. Sarah and I sat in the living room, wide-eyed and exhausted, trying to figure out what to do. We both knew we couldn't stay there any longer. Something terrible was lurking within those walls. It was as if the apartment itself was alive, a cursed place that had trapped us in its nightmare. We decided then and there that we would leave. We couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The scratches on my neck, the strange whispers, the figure in white. Everything pointed to the fact that we were not welcome in that apartment. We packed our things hastily, as though fleeing from an invisible force. There was no time to waste. A few days later, after we'd moved out, we walked past the old apartment. It looked the same on the outside, but we both knew that something sinister still lingered inside. We didn't know who had moved in after us, but a part of us couldn't help but wonder if they, too, would experience the same horrors we had. We would never forget what happened there. The memories were too vivid, too terrifying. It felt like a chapter in our lives that we could never truly escape, no matter how far we ran. It was as if the apartment had claimed a piece of our souls, leaving behind only fear and unease. But we couldn't dwell on it. We had to move on with our lives, even though a part of us would always carry that terror with us. As I reflect on that time, I realize how much it changed us. It was one of the scariest experiences of my college years. I was far away from home, living in an apartment in Dasma. I don't want to mention the exact location for the privacy of those involved, but I can tell you that it was a place I would never, ever want to revisit. It's hard to explain, but when you live in a place where you feel watched, where every corner seems to whisper your name, it's not something you can easily forget. We were only in our third year of college, yet that apartment experience made us question everything we thought we knew about the world. Some things, some places, hold on to you in ways you can't even comprehend until you're living it. And sometimes, it's only when you leave that you realize how close you came to being consumed by something far darker than you ever imagined. Thank you for reading our story. It's a chapter of my life I'll never forget, and I hope that by sharing it, I can warn others. Because you never know what might be lurking behind closed doors, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. It was 2 weeks after I moved in when things started to get strange. One evening around 9 or 10 p.m., I had already finished dinner and was lying in bed, chatting with my mom on the phone. We spoke for a couple of hours, and once we hung up, I immediately fell asleep. I didn't realize how much time passed, but at some point, I woke up suddenly feeling something odd against my face, like someone's hair brushing against me. It was light, almost ticklish, but it was enough to make me furrow my brow in confusion. I tried turning over, but the sensation didn't go away. I was too tired to open my eyes, but I knew something was off. The lights in the apartment had already been turned off, yet there was still enough light filtering in from the street lamps outside to make everything visible. I could see everything around me, even though the room should have been dark. I was in that half-asleep, half-awake state, trying to figure out if it was just my imagination when the sensation moved closer, and it felt almost like someone's breath, cold and unsettling near my ear. My heart began to race. I slowly opened my eyes, hoping it was just the result of a strange dream. But no, the air felt thick and heavy. I could feel the weight of something, but nothing was there. I quickly glanced around the room, my eyes searching for any sign of what could be causing this sensation. The room was empty, and for a moment I thought it might just be stress or exhaustion, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The weird sensation didn't stop that night. In fact, the next few days felt strange, and I began noticing little things that I couldn't explain. Sometimes I'd hear faint noises coming from the other rooms, but whenever I'd check, there was no one there. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, but the uneasy feeling never quite left me. It was then that I began to regret moving in, wondering if I'd made a mistake. The peace and quiet I thought I'd find were becoming suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The apartment, which seemed perfect at first, started feeling colder, darker, as if it had a life of its own. It wasn't long before I started feeling even more unsettled. One evening, after an exhausting day, I lay down in bed, ready to sleep. It must have been around 11 p.m., and I had just finished working on a thesis project with my classmates. My body was beyond tired, and I thought that sleep would be my escape from all the stress. I took a quick shower and collapsed on the bed. No sooner had I closed my eyes than I felt an intense weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. My body was frozen, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move. The only thing I could control was my eyes. As I opened them, I saw her. There, at the head of my bed, was a woman with long hair, her face tilted down, and a wide, unsettling grin stretched across her face. She was watching me. My heart raced, and my chest tightened in fear. I felt like I was suffocating in her presence, my body paralyzed with terror. The only thing I could think of was, I have to wake up. I have to wake up now. I tried to close my eyes again, but even when I did, I could still see her. It was as if she was etched into my vision. My mind raced and I panicked, thinking this might be the end. I feared that if I didn't wake up soon, something terrible would happen. In desperation, I focused all my energy on moving, just one small part of my body, anything. My fingers twitched. Finally, with a burst of effort, I was able to move my toes. I knew then that I had to get out of this trance. That small movement helped me snap out of the paralysis, and with one final push, I woke up, gasping for air. I was drenched in sweat, my heart thudding in my chest as if I had just run a marathon. I couldn't even understand what had just happened. Was it a dream, or was it real? I didn't want to believe it, but the terror I felt was so real that it couldn't have been just a dream. The following days weren't any better. The feeling of dread continued to hang over me. The sleep paralysis came back again and again, each time more intense, until it got to the point where I could hardly sleep at all. My mind was always on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next terrifying experience to occur. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was too scared to even think straight. After weeks of struggling, I finally made the decision to leave the apartment. It felt like I was escaping something that had been haunting me for far too long. I couldn't explain what it was, but I knew deep down that staying there any longer would only make things worse. It wasn't easy to let go of the place, but I had no choice. The fear had consumed me, and I needed peace, a new start, somewhere far from that apartment and the terrifying experiences I had endured. As the days went by, I found myself reflecting more and more on everything that had happened. The time in the apartment felt like a distant memory, but still, a part of me carried the weight of those frightening moments. However, with the arrival of 2025, a new sensation began to take over me. It was as if the new year was a chance for a fresh start, an opportunity to finally leave behind the fear that had consumed me over the past few months. The first day of the year was quiet and calm, almost as if the universe was giving me a pause to breathe. I remember sitting on my bed, staring out of the window as the first light of the day began to appear. I thought about how much that experience had changed me. Before, I was someone who believed everything had a logical explanation. But now I couldn't deny that the unexplainable existed, that life's mysteries often went beyond our understanding. But I didn't want to live in fear anymore. I knew that the best way to move forward was to face my own demons, the ones that had been left behind, and the ones that might still arise. And so, after many sleepless nights and days when the exhaustion made me question my sanity, I decided that the best thing to do was to move on with courage and without looking back. The memories of the woman with long hair and piercing eyes were still fresh in my mind. I remembered the peculiar smell she left in the air, the feeling of being watched throughout the night. But as the days passed, something inside me started to change. The tension began to ease, and I started to remember what truly mattered: my peace. I couldn't allow fear to control my life any longer. I deserved to be happy, to have a fresh start. It was then that I began to realize that what had happened in the apartment wasn't a punishment. It wasn't something I had done wrong. Life no matter how confusing and frightening it could be, had a way of teaching us lessons, even through the darkest moments. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to face it head-on with dignity and determination. So, with the new year, I began to open myself up to new possibilities. I left behind the fears that had bound me and began focusing on the good things that were to come. I concentrated on my future, the opportunities that would arise, the friendships I would make, and the achievements I would still reach. I knew that fear had no place in my life anymore. The days passed quickly, and soon I was back to my routine, but now with a different perspective. I no longer felt as vulnerable, as weak. The version of myself that hid under the covers, afraid of what could happen, began to disappear. In its place, a stronger woman emerged, someone ready to face any challenge life would throw at me. I started sleeping better without the nightmares, without the unsettling visits. The air in my new home seemed fresher, quieter. I finally felt at peace. The darkness that had invaded my world seemed to give way to the light, and each day I felt freer. Free from fear, free from the past. And with that freedom, I realized something important. True strength wasn't about fighting against the things that couldn't be explained, but about accepting the unknown and moving forward. I learned that life is made up of moments, some good, some bad, but the most important thing is how we react to them. What truly matters is our ability to keep going no matter what happens to us. And so, with time, the memory of the apartment became just a part of my story. A story that, although frightening, taught me so much. And now, more than ever, I was ready to write the next chapter of my life, with courage and determination always moving forward. In 2025, the blessings I had longed for began to arrive, but not in a miraculous way. They came in the form of little victories, quiet moments of peace, new friends who brought warmth into my life, and a sense of purpose that had been missing before. I realized that life doesn't always give us what we expect, but it often gives us exactly what we need to grow stronger and move forward. The challenges I had faced were no longer shadows looming over me. They were memories I had learned from, lessons I had absorbed. And with each new day, I became more certain that the future held even more promise, more happiness, and more peace than I could ever have imagined. As I sat by the window one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I smiled. The road ahead was mine to travel, and no fear, no past experience would ever hold me back again. I was finally free. Free to live, to love, and to embrace the unknown with open arms. And as I thought about the year ahead, I knew it would be one of growth, change, and new beginnings. A year where I would stand tall, unafraid, and ready to face anything that came my way. I was no longer the girl who had been paralyzed by fear. I was Lily, strong, resilient, and full of hope for whatever the future would bring.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Also make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. Let me know in the comments what you liked, what you didn't, and any constructive feedback you have. Love to hear from you. Your support and input help make future videos even better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.